The Price of Obsession, the tragic story of Rie Shibata. Prologue, the illusion of the victim. Human emotions are driven by individual choices. When a person decides to love someone, that emotional investment is entirely a personal action. The object of that affection is under no obligation to return those feelings. Yet, when love is unrequited, or when a relationship naturally dissolves because the mutual spark fades, people frequently spiral into bitterness. They look at the natural end of a connection or a lack of reciprocal love and convince themselves they have been deeply wronged. In the wreckage of a failed or one-sided relationship, almost everyone casts themselves as the victim. If everyone is the innocent party, then where do the victimizers go? This psychological delusion, the inability to accept that someone is simply not obligated to love you back, can mutate into an all-consuming darkness. In Japan, this exact brand of obsessive entitlement led to a bizarre, chilling crime that exposed massive bureaucratic failures and ultimately forced an entire nation to rewrite its laws. The Golden Standard, 2004. The story begins in Japan in the year 2004. Rie Shibata was a vibrant, 25-year-old university graduate. She was highly athletic, deeply invested in personal fitness, and had recently landed a demanding career at a prominent advertising agency in Tokyo. Rie lived in Setagaya, an upscale, serene, and prestigious residential ward located on the southwestern edge of Tokyo. That same year, an athletic club specializing in badminton opened right in her neighborhood. Eager to maintain her physical conditioning, Rie signed up immediately and became a dedicated regular. The club's head coach was a 32-year-old man named Hidenori Utsutsumi. Alongside his part-time coaching gig at the athletic club, Hidenori worked as a social studies teacher at an all-girls high school. In Japanese culture, teachers, sensei, and athletic coaches command an immense level of societal respect and moral authority. Because Hidenori held both titles, he was viewed as a pillar of the community. He was widely beloved, highly respected, and enjoyed a massive wave of popularity among the club members. Rie held him in the same high regard. Even after her corporate workload in Tokyo intensified, she refused to skip her badminton practices. Rie's dedication wasn't purely fueled by a love for the sport. She had developed a deep infatuation with Hidenori. Hidenori was equally attracted to her. For a long time, both dropped subtle hints, waiting for the right moment. Eventually, Hidenori confessed his feelings, and Rie happily admitted she had been waiting for him to speak up. They quickly became inseparable, moving past casual dating into a profound romance where both felt they had found their life partners. After a period of intense courtship, Hidenori orchestrated a surprise marriage proposal, presenting Rie with an engagement ring. Rie was ecstatic and accepted, but she requested a single condition: that they postpone the formal wedding ceremony for a short period. She argued that they needed to secure their financial foundations, establish their respective careers, and build up their savings before taking on the responsibility of starting a family. Hidenori was visibly disappointed by the delay, but he recognized the practical logic in her reasoning and agreed. The turning point in red flags. As the months rolled by, Rie poured her energy into her role at the advertising agency, striving to prove her capabilities in a highly competitive industry. By its very nature, the advertising field required constant, daily communication with male clients, corporate executives, and creative colleagues. This professional reality triggered a dark, latent psychological shift inside Hidenori. He transformed into an intensely, irrationally jealous partner. The supportive, charismatic coach vanished, replaced by an overbearing controller. Anytime Rie interacted with another man, even for strictly corporate or professional reasons, Hidenori would cause an absolute uproar. His temper became a volatile trigger. If Rie was a few minutes late returning from work, he would lose his mind and remain furious for days. He could not tolerate a single deviation from her schedule. On one occasion, a male colleague from her office politely offered to drive her to a destination. When Hidenori found out, he erupted into a violent screaming match, hurling accusations and creating a massive scene. He explicitly demanded that no other man breathe near her. Rie felt entirely suffocated, realizing she was walking on eggshells around a human volcano that could detonate over the most trivial occurrence. The psychological toll began to erode her mental health. Seeking a way out of the trauma, Rie scheduled appointments with a professional psychiatrist. After reviewing the severe emotional duress she was under, the doctor gave her an explicit warning. The relationship was deeply toxic, entirely unsalvageable, and she needed to sever ties immediately for her own psychological well-being. Around the same time, a close male friend from her workplace noticed her distress and gave her the exact same advice. Armed with the validation of her doctor and her peer, Rie sat Hidenori down in July 2006, after 2 years of dating, and officially ended the relationship, the digital onslaught and first suicide attempt. Rie resolved to start a fresh chapter, focusing entirely on her corporate ambitions and healing from the emotional scars of the breakup. However, her peace lasted exactly 1 week. Hidenori opened his laptop and launched a digital campaign of harassment. He sent her an email that read, "I will not allow you to be the only happy one. You walked away to build a happy life, but I am going to ensure you never get to enjoy that happiness." In the very same message, Hidenori threatened to commit suicide if she did not immediately reverse her decision and return to him. Rie recognized the psychological manipulation for what it was. Refusing to be blackmailed, she marched directly into the nearest Tokyo police precinct and filed an official harassment report. She also returned to her psychiatrist to document the immense stress the threats were causing. When Hidenori discovered that Rie had gone to the authorities, his fragile ego was completely shattered. Filled with intense humiliation and frustration, he decided to follow through on his threat. He walked into a public park, ingested a massive, lethal cocktail of pills, washed them down with a heavy amount of alcohol, and lay down to die. However, his attempt failed. Bystanders spotted his unconscious body, alerted emergency services, and paramedics managed to pump his stomach and save his life. Following his release from the hospital, Hidenori's fixation intensified. He began bombarding Rie's inbox with multiple emails every single day. Over the next many months, the frequency of the direct emails slowly began to taper off, but not because Hidenori had moved on. Instead, he had transitioned into a silent, full-time digital stalker, covertly monitoring her entire life through her various social media accounts. His psychological stability completely collapsed, causing him to neglect and eventually lose both his high school teaching position and his badminton coaching job. In Japan's incredibly rigid and traditional professional market, resigning or being terminated under a cloud of mental instability results in a catastrophic consequence. Your employers will refuse to issue a formal letter of recommendation, suisenjo. In the Japanese job market, attempting to secure employment without this letter is an immediate red flag. Prospective companies assume you have committed a severe ethical breach or are entirely unemployable, leading to an automatic rejection. Hidenori found himself completely blacklisted. He was entirely broke, hopelessly unemployed, and forced to live under his mother's roof, relying on her to feed and house him at nearly 40 years old. His societal status was completely ruined. With nothing left to live for, his entire existence narrowed down to a single toxic objective: keeping tabs on Rie Shibata, the 2010 revelation. For 4 agonizing years, from 2006 to 2010, Hidenori maintained this obsessive, daily digital surveillance. Rie, assuming the silence meant he had finally built a new life, completely cut him out of her mind. Then, in April 2010, Hidenori suffered a massive shock while scrolling through her profiles. Rie posted an update, officially announcing her marriage. She hadn't just gotten married, she had actually been secretly wed for 2 whole years. The ultimate insult to Hidenori was the identity of her new husband. He was the exact same male colleague from the advertising agency who had originally advised her to break up with Hidenori back in 2006. Rie had gone to extreme lengths to protect her new life. She had launched an independent business project and intentionally registered the venture in the Kanagawa prefecture, completely away from Tokyo. Furthermore, when advertising her business on public digital platforms, she deliberately continued using her maiden name, Rie Shibata, rather than her legal married name, Rie Miyoshi. She lived in constant fear that Hidenori might stumble upon her professional pages, so she kept her real identity entirely obscured. Because 4 years had passed without a single email from him, she falsely concluded that the danger had evaporated, finally allowing her to post her personal milestone. The discovery completely broke whatever remaining sanity Hidenori possessed. He was pushed into a state of absolute madness. Within a 2-week window, Hidenori sent Rie more than 2,000 graphic, terrifying emails. The messages were no longer pathetic pleas for reconciliation. They were explicit, detailed death threats. He wrote, "I am going to hunt you down. I am going to stab you repeatedly until you die of absolute terror." Terrified for her safety, Rie fled to the police station to present the mountain of digital evidence. However, she was met with a shocking, bureaucratic wall. At that time, Japan's strict anti-stalking laws, Stalker Kisei Ho, had been written in an era that only legally recognized harassment carried out via physical telephone calls or traditional fax machines. Because the legislation had never been updated to encompass modern internet communication, electronic mail fell into a massive legal loophole. The police literally told Rie that because the threats were sent via email, they had no legal authority to arrest Hidenori or file criminal stalking charges. The absolute maximum the frustrated officers could do was dispatch a unit to Hidenori's mother's house. They handed him a verbal warning, essentially telling his family to keep a tight leash on your son and tell him to stop bothering the young lady. The mountain rescue and the 8-0 email onslaught. The verbal warning from the police only exacerbated the situation. Hidenori viewed the police showing up at his family home as a supreme, unforgivable insult to his honor. He spiraled into a catastrophic, paralyzing depression. Later in 2010, he traveled out to a remote, rugged mountain range with the explicit intention of ending his life deep in the wilderness. When his mother reported him missing, a massive government search and rescue operation was launched. A police helicopter eventually spotted his body stranded on a treacherous cliffside. The state spent an enormous amount of public taxpayer resources to execute a high-altitude helicopter rescue. Hidenori was pulled off the mountain alive and immediately committed to a secure psychiatric hospital. He spent an extended period under mandatory psychiatric evaluation and therapy. Eventually, the medical staff concluded that his suicidal ideation had cleared, declaring him fully rehabilitated and officially discharged him back into society. The psychiatric cure was a complete illusion. By April 2011, Hidenori was right back in front of his computer screen, launching a campaign of psychological terror that far surpassed his previous actions. He began sending Rie more than 80 graphic emails every single day. The messages contained horrifyingly descriptive prose detailing exactly how he planned to butcher her, sever her limbs, and end her existence. Rie's life became a living hell. She was constantly reporting to the police station to log the daily threats. Recognizing the terrifying escalation, the police department bypassed the anti-stalking law by officially classifying the situation as a case of criminal intimidation and terror. They dispatched technicians to Rie's private residence to install an emergency electronic panic alarm system directly linked to the precinct. Hidenori, realizing she was heavily guarded at home, shifted to psychological warfare designed to destroy her professional and social standing. He began calling premium catering services and restaurants, placing massive, expensive, fraudulent orders for sushi, pizzas, and high-end meals, and directing the couriers to deliver them straight to Rie's former advertising office. He wanted to ensure her name was synonymous with chaos wherever she went. Rie was utterly paralyzed by fear. She realized that despite the police alarms, this man was closing in on her. She took desperate, military-grade measures to completely erase her existence from the physical and digital world. She walked outside and physically unscrewed the traditional family nameplate Hyosatsu from the front of her house. She filed a formal legal injunction with the municipal government to have her name entirely redacted from the public neighborhood residential maps and registries. She burned her professional business cards, deleted her primary social media footprints, and established entirely new accounts under heavily encrypted, obscure aliases. She refused to step foot outside her front door without wearing large, dark sunglasses to mask her face, even when walking in the pitch black of night. She returned to the police, weeping, begging them to make the onslaught stop, noting that her former colleagues were facing constant harassment from the fraudulent deliveries. The catastrophic bureaucratic blunder. In June 2011, the Tokyo police finally accumulated enough legal standing under the intimidation statutes to execute a formal arrest warrant against Hidenori Utsutsumi. He was taken into custody, and it appeared that Rie might finally secure her freedom. Instead, the arrest paved the way for her execution. During the formal interrogation process at the precinct, the handling detective, attempting to be incredibly thorough, sat across from Hidenori and read the official arrest warrant and detention paperwork completely out loud. The detective read the legal names of the parties involved. The paperwork contained the highly confidential personal information that Rie had spent years hiding. The exact name of the city she had relocated to, the specific municipal district where her home was located, and her husband's legal last name, Miyoshi. The detective did not do this maliciously. He was blindly following standard protocol by reading the text of the warrant. Hidenori sat silently in the interrogation chair, focusing his mind, and permanently memorized every single piece of data. He now knew exactly what region of Japan she lived in and what name was stamped on her bank accounts. Hidenori was brought before a judge and convicted of criminal intimidation. The court handed him a 1-year prison sentence, but under the standard judicial practices of the time for first-time nonviolent convictions, the judge granted a suspended sentence with probation. This meant Hidenori would not step foot inside a prison cell unless he violated the strict conditions of his probation over the course of the following year. The primary, absolute condition of his release was that he was legally banned from executing any contact with Rie Shibata, no physical visits, no phone calls, and 0 digital messages. Armed with the knowledge of her city and district, Hidenori went completely radio silent. He stopped sending a single email or making a single wave. He channeled 100% of his daily energy into a quiet, methodical search to find her exact street name and house number. Because the digital harassment dropped to 0, the police department completely misread the situation. They concluded that the suspended sentence had successfully rehabilitated him and that he had finally learned his lesson. In early March 2012, asserting that the threat level had dropped to 0, the police department officially closed Rie's file and sent technicians to her home to uninstall and remove the emergency panic alarms and security cameras. The digital manhunt and Yahoo Answers. By April 2012, Hidenori's silent physical search hit a brick wall. He was utterly unable to pinpoint her exact house within the large district. Frustrated and losing control, he snapped. He broke his probation conditions and unleashed a torrent of 1,090 emails straight to Rie's inbox in a matter of days. This time, his psychological tactics underwent a strange shift. He began adopting a pseudo-legal tone, writing, "We entered into a binding sacred oral contract to be married when I presented you with an engagement ring. By marrying another man, you have committed a severe breach of contract. You are legally obligated to pay me millions of yen in financial restitution and compensation for my emotional damages. Rie, horrified to see his name pop up on her screen after months of silence, ran back to the police precinct. However, the officers reviewed the new batch of 1,090 emails and noted a distinct lack of direct, explicit threats of physical murder or dismemberment. The text strictly demanded financial compensation for a broken engagement. The police informed her that under the penal code, they could not legally file criminal charges for a financial dispute. They advised her to stay calm, refusing to reinstall the security infrastructure, but promised that routine patrol cars would occasionally cruise down her neighborhood street during the week. Shortly after, the emails stopped again. Rie desperately prayed that he had run out of energy. In reality, Hidenori had shifted his operations to the internet. He turned to Yahoo Answers, known in Japan as Yahoo Chiebukuro, an immensely popular digital crowdsourcing platform where anonymous users post questions for the public to answer. Operating under dozens of highly orchestrated burner accounts and fake usernames, Hidenori posted more than 400 highly specific questions on the platform. He constructed elaborate, fraudulent narratives to trick the internet community. He would write, "I am desperately trying to track down an old childhood benefactor who saved my life years ago. I know the exact city and district they live in, but they recently changed their phone number and moved houses, so I don't have their street name or house number. I want to surprise them with a beautiful gift to express my gratitude. How can I legally find someone's exact address if I only know their district? What public records can I access? Should I hire a private investigator?" Woven directly between these seemingly innocent inquiries, Hidenori's burner accounts began posting dark, terrifying questions. What is the exact maximum prison sentence in Japan for a crime of passion murder? If a killer immediately commits suicide after taking a life, what happens to their family's estate? How does the forensic team trace fingerprints on a blade? The private investigators and the municipality leak. Realizing that the internet community could not provide the exact address, Hidenori decided to utilize professional tracking services. He put on his most professional, high-end clothing, walked into a licensed private investigation agency, and spun the exact same romantic lie. He told the investigator that a gorgeous woman from his old athletic club had provided him with life-changing help, and he desperately wanted her address so he could mail her a formal thank you arrangement. The first agency ran a preliminary search, found nothing, and turned him away. Refusing to surrender, Hidenori walked into a secondary private investigation firm. This case was assigned to a female private investigator. Unlike the first agency, this firm utilized highly deceptive tactics. The female investigator instructed a male colleague to call the municipal Zushi City Hall, the local government building managing the district where Rie resided. The male investigator called the tax and registry department of City Hall and engaged in a high-stakes deception. He identified himself to the city clerk as Rie's estranged, long-separated husband. He claimed that a massive, urgent, outstanding corporate tax penalty had been leveled against her name, and he had the physical cash invoice in his hands. He stated he desperately needed to forward the document to her immediately to save her from legal arrest, but lacked her current street address. The city clerk typed the name Rie Miyoshi into the government computer database. The moment the file loaded, a massive, bright red security warning flashed across the computer monitor. It was the explicit legal restriction block that Rie had personally filed, strictly warning all municipal employees that under no circumstances was her personal contact information to be disclosed due to an active stalking threat. Through pure, unadulterated bureaucratic negligence and laziness, the city clerk completely ignored the flashing system warning. Wanting to process the call quickly, the clerk read her exact street name, block, and house number over the telephone line to the investigator. The firm compiled the data and handed the physical address directly to Hidenori Utsutsumi. The 6th of November, 2012. the execution. The 6th of November 2012 marked Hidenori Utsutsumi's 40th birthday. He decided that this milestone would be the day he brought his 8-year obsession to a permanent conclusion. He purchased a standardized cardboard shipping box and dressed himself in the uniform of a commercial delivery courier to ensure no neighbors would question his presence. He boarded a train and traveled directly to the coastal city of Zushi in Kanagawa Prefecture. Utilizing the stolen coordinates, he navigated the streets until he stood directly in front of Rie's house. He looked at the front door. This was the moment he had sacrificed his career, his sanity, and his entire life to reach. He initially intended to walk up and ring the doorbell disguised as a courier, knowing that if Rie answered, he could force his way inside. However, as he scanned the exterior of the home, his eyes caught a small window on the first floor. The homeowners had accidentally left it unlatched and slightly open to vent the room. Recognizing an uncontested point of entry, Hidenori abandoned his courier ruse, slipped around the side of the house, and quietly breached the window. A few hours later, at approximately 1:10 p.m., a real commercial delivery driver drove down that exact residential street to drop off a legitimate package at a neighboring home. As the driver walked down the sidewalk, he froze in absolute terror, dropping his clipboard. Dangling from the structural beams of the second-floor balcony of Rie's house was the limp, suspended body of a man hanging from a thick rope. The driver sprinted away from the property, pulled out his phone, and dialed the emergency police line. A fleet of police cruisers arrived on the scene within minutes. Officers cut down the hanging body of Hidenori Utsutsumi from the balcony and immediately realized he was completely dead. Fearing the worst for the occupants inside, officers drew their weapons and physically smashed through the front door of the residence. The interior of the living room was a scene of absolute carnage. Rie Shibata was lying flat across the living room couch, completely drenched in blood. She had been subjected to a frenzied, savage attack, sustaining deep stab wounds across her face, her neck, her chest, and her hands. She had fought desperately for her life, but had been completely overwhelmed. A few feet away from her corpse, resting on the hardwood floor, was a heavy kitchen knife dripping with blood. The forensic investigation later revealed that the blade belonged to the household, but it was completely covered in Hidenori's fingerprints. The medical examiner's autopsy determined that Rie had been slaughtered at approximately 2 p.m. or just prior to the police entry based on body temperature metrics. Hidenori had blindsided her through the open window. When she attempted to flee toward the exit, he trapped her against the sofa, stabbed her dozens of times until she bled to death, located a heavy utility rope inside the home, secured it to the upper balcony, and hanged himself. The aftermath, public outrage, and legal legacy. The horrific nature of the Zushi stalking murder instantly exploded into a massive national scandal, dominating Japanese media for months. The public backlash against the Tokyo and Kanagawa police departments was unprecedented. During the media investigations, journalists uncovered the catastrophic blunder committed during the June 2011 interrogation. The press exposed that the handling detective had read Rie's top-secret location out loud in front of the killer not just once, but twice. Furthermore, the public learned that the police had completely ignored the 1,090 emails sent during his probation period under the technicality that they were financial demands rather than explicit death threats, failing to trigger the mandatory jail time associated with his suspended sentence. The legal fallout was swift but incomplete. The private investigation agency, the female private investigator who orchestrated the deceptive phone call to City Hall, was arrested, brought to trial, and sentenced to 2 years and 6 months in federal prison for the illegal acquisition of private consumer data through fraudulent misrepresentation. The City Hall leak. Investigators attempted to criminally prosecute the city clerk who had leaked her address. However, when forensic IT experts audited the municipal computer systems, they discovered that the terminal used to access Rie's restricted file was logged in under the digital credentials of a 6-0 20-year-old senior tax department employee. Crucially, records proved this elderly man was not even present in the building on the day of the leak. Another employee had simply sat down at his abandoned, logged-in terminal to conduct the illegal search. Because the staff operating in that department rallied together and maintained a wall of silence, denying who touched the keyboard, the specific clerk who handed Rie her death sentence was never legally identified or fired. The civil lawsuit. Rie's grieving husband filed a massive landmark civil lawsuit against the municipality of Zushi, demanding 11 million yen in damages for gross institutional negligence and the fatal breach of privacy protocols. The court ruled entirely in his favor, forcing the city to pay out a massive financial settlement. The true lasting monument to Rie Shibata's memory was the immediate overhaul of the Japanese legal apparatus. The absolute outrage felt by the citizenry forced the National Diet, Japan's parliament, to completely amend the Anti-Stalking Act. For the very first time in East Asian legal history, the law explicitly categorized electronic mail, social media direct messages, and digital harassment as severe, arrestable forms of stalking, completely closing the fax and phone loophole. Rie's brother was left entirely devastated by the tragedy, expressing profound grief that because Hidenori had taken his own life, there was no living monster to face in a court of law, leaving his family with nowhere to direct their anger. Channeling his pain into systemic change, he established the National Stalking Prevention and Research Council. He dedicated his life to traveling the nation, arguing that the justice system must mandate intense psychiatric rehabilitation and psychological intervention the very first time a stalker is identified. He maintained that traditional punitive jail sentences are entirely useless against a fundamentally broken, obsessive mind, and that tracking the psychology of the perpetrator is the only way to save the next Rie Shibata. Epilogue: the maturity of letting go. The tragedy of Rie Shibata and Hidenori Utsutsumi stands as an extreme warning about the dangers of emotional entitlement. It forces an uncomfortable realization. Human beings must learn to accept that not every profound feeling they hold will receive an equal echo in the world. If you choose to love someone from afar, or if you invest your soul into a relationship that ultimately fractures, you will inevitably experience a crushing wave of grief. It is easy to look at that pain, point a finger at the person who walked away, and cry out that you have been victimized. But it is not an act of injustice when someone chooses not to love you. They never signed a contract guaranteeing their affection. They never forced you to harbor expectations, and they do not owe you their life. True maturity requires an individual to look at their reflection, master their ego, and accept reality with dignity. When an attachment is one-sided, or when a romance has reached its final page, the only honorable path is to walk away with your self-respect intact. We must possess the emotional wisdom to understand that sometimes the people we choose to love are simply never meant to belong to us.